All right. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I saw on my calendar that today was the International Day of Friendship. It's the International Day of Friendship. So perfect timing to have my friend Daniel from Bandits Keep hop on. And I think we had mentioned, or I had said previously in the kind of lead up post up that we were going to talk about Undead, which is a great topic. Also, I have linked to Bandits Keep on YouTube in the show notes. Daniel, feel free to drop any links you want to share in the chat, if you have any, if you want to share. I guess we could just get into it. So I know that we had talked about Undead. Which other video that we did that we got into Undead a little bit?
Right. I think the time.
I can't hear you now. Are you muted?
Hold on. I think I'm muted.
Has it already gone all wrong? Hold on, is it me? All right, hold on a minute. That might just be. Hold on a minute. Let me just fix something here. All right, try now.
I don't think I'm muted.
Okay, no, it was me. Okay. It was my end.
But I now I've clicked on something and okay, good. I got rid of it. I think it was the one that we did on Mega Dungeons, maybe.
Right.
Because you had mentioned how in your campaign the undead don't die just by smashing and they keep coming back, and then Jason over at Nerds RPG Variety Cast made a comment on my podcast that he really liked that idea. So yeah, we kind of touched on it, but yeah, I mean, undead is a huge topic, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. So I guess kind of springboarding off of that, one thing that I really have liked digging into is the concept of sort of consecrated spaces versus desecrated spaces, and having to kind of really cleanse areas. And part of that for me was thinking about how can I make them more interesting, more dangerous, something that's going to require maybe some extra ideas that's just we're going to come in with maces and swords and just hack away at them. Plus, I feel like it makes those places more interesting, not just as you maybe coming through one way, but coming back. You can't just clear out the crypt and walk out the other side and think that everything's hunky-dory. You clean out the crypt, you go down a few levels. What happens when you come back and those guys are, still there, and now you're potentially depleted resources. So hopefully leading to some interesting play with folks trying to figure out what can we do to deal with these things in a permanent way when just simple swords, won't do. Plus, I think it does make the cleric, when they can get that destroy instead of turn check, it makes them feel a little bit more, that they've made a real change to this particular area. It's not just, I just killed them instead of us killing them as a group. It's like, no, now you have prevented that skeleton from coming back. It is gone. Like Tom Bombadil sending the white on its way from the Barrow Downs. Like you have taken it off the board, which I think is cool.
Yeah, I think that you can maybe look at why the undead is or how they're there in two different ways, right? You've got like desecrated areas where the undead are rising because of some kind of evil acts that are happening, or maybe a massive, like, not a standard spell, but some kind of like ritual or over time. Or you have like a magic user or a cleric just casting Animate Dead, right? So if you're in a graveyard and you're fighting a necromancer and he raises up 5 skeletons, that's different than an actual evil place where undead are coming and thriving because of something that's been done that you can, let's say, look to undo, right?
Absolutely.
So it depends on where you are, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. And it means that when you have a necromancer operating in a desecrated area, that kind of superpowers them up versus being somewhere else, which is why they would seek out these kind of, if they can't create them themselves, would want to seek out the cursed place or the battlefield or whatever that's just gone bad, so that they have this more powerful base than if they're just raising skeletons and just get bashed down, in a heartbeat.
Right, and I like the idea too on the contrast of that of like safe spaces where perhaps even within this one graveyard there is a grave or a mausoleum or a statue or something of some kind of holy person that just happens to be there, right? That can't be tainted, so you can use that as a refuge. Of course, the undead building up around you represent another problem.
Right, absolutely, but it definitely is a good idea. Frederick Orker's already pointed out level drain, so I think it's all about the level drain. Yeah, well, I think we'll get to the kind of mechanical things, but just as, I guess, conceptually, are there particular ways that you use undead in your campaigns? Do you think about them fulfilling certain roles? You just put them wherever you feel like they're thematically relevant, or what's your, when you decide to plunk undead on the map, what's your thought process usually?
Yeah, I like to take different angles with them. I'm not a huge like zombie slash skeleton person. I mean, I'll use them sometimes, but when I'm using undead, I'm typically using the more powerful stuff like vampires and mummies, and I use them in usually in the history, and taking into account like I always remember, I for the life of me I cannot find the story. I read it when I was maybe 12 years old. There was a story where this vampire. I mean, in the end, you realize he's a vampire. He's like this old man, and he comes and he starts living with this family, and little by little, just the children start getting sicker and sicker, and then you can see through the story he's getting more vibrant, and then eventually, like the children fall to disease and they die, and then he kind of moves on, and you realize that like it was him being there that was the problem, and that this is just another way that we can use undead to drain the living as opposed to just enemies to just smack with a mace, like you say. So I like to use them like that in kind of more like you say, thematic ways. I think that having a powerful undead force is a lot makes them more scary. I can't imagine unless you just have hordes and hordes of them, skeletons and zombies being scary after like the first level or so. So typically stay away from those. In most cases, unless I'm just running a one-shot fun, go smash stuff game.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think you can templatize them, right? I think third edition had that kind of concept where you could take any kind of creature and sort of turn it into a skeleton type. Because I think in the fiction, boy, I'm losing my voice now. I think see examples of like skeleton kings or Skeletor from He-Man and these kind of skeletal, beings that are powerful, even though they are, at some point a skeleton or skeleton-like. I don't know, Skeletor is just what his face is skeleton, right? But the rest of him seems to be fleshy enough. So I'm not sure if he took off his clothes what you'd see underneath. But for these purposes,
he's pretty buff for a skeleton.
He is pretty buff. he's very buff. They all those guys work out. They were all very buff. To sort of use them because I kind of like the idea of having. I definitely get what you're saying about skeleton zombies, undead. They're kind of minions, but I also like to think of these more powerful creatures that, even though maybe you're using, say, the stat block of a mummy lord or something, but it is, the form it takes is more of a skeleton than a mummy. Zombies, I like to think of as just these big kind of just meat, just like a not even a tank. I don't even know what you call it. Just like a big thing to just kind of take up space, just put in front of a bad guy just to eat damage and eat attacks while they can do other things, almost like something you might put on the battlefield. We're just gonna move these like the elephants, sort of. You're just gonna put them forward, just gonna send them into the fray, and then you don't even care what happens to them. They are literally just cannon fodder or catapult fodder, if you will, or whatever fodder.
Yeah, no, I like that, and I think that like when I have used them to best effect, I think I usually use so many of them that you're not going to fight them. Like I like the idea of just hordes of them rising. One of the earlier when I first got back into playing one of the earlier games or modules or whatever I wrote, and it was for fourth edition. I just had like so many zombies. They just kept coming. I made this whole mini game out of like them running through a graveyard and all these, and people were just like, "What the hell?" But it was like that's what's scary to zombies. If I give you 6 zombies that meets the proper CR, that's not scary, right? But if I have like 10 zombies rising every round, what are you going to do? That becomes a lot more of
it almost becomes like an environmental hazard, more or less.
Right,
Which I built one in the game I'm playing where they were trying to sneak into a castle that had been infected with something they didn't never figured out what it was that was creating all these undead in there, and they were trying to sneak through some tunnels, and there was a midden hole that came down into this kind of pit that they had to cross, and zombies were just falling into this midden hole. Either they were being dropped or they were falling in, and so you had in the hole itself this big pit that was just a mass of different zombie parts, but the zombie parts were slowly coalescing back, and sometimes they were forming these weird hybrids where it had like 3 different individuals, but they were all they just kind of attached to each other and were sort of climbing out of the midden hole. And so they had this, right. They were trying to figure out as one, how can we get across this thing? Because I said, well, you can kind of stand on it, but if things are kind of grabbing at you, just arms and mouths and everything else. But at the same time, it's kind of creating these sort of weird gestalt zombies that are kind of just reaching out for you, just kind of moving for you, just kind of towards you, sort of on pure, I don't know, undead instinct. And so that was kind of, it was a little bit of enemies, but it was also sort of a trap or a puzzle to figure out, okay, you've got this situation, like a 30-foot wide pit that you have to kind of get across. How do you do that given this hazard at the bottom? You know, in some ways, mechanically, it wasn't much different than if it had been, say, a spiked pit or something, or filled with acid or something else. But you know, just purely mechanically, but thematically, it was all these different zombie body parts, kind of trying to grasp and pull and chew.
I really like that, and it brings up a good point that I think it would make Undead better. We'll say, or like better word, it would be is all about narrative, right? Like the undead themselves, like a zombie or a skeleton, or these like lower level ones, until you get to things like level drain, they're really just the same thing as fighting an orc, right? In a lot of ways, right? They don't have anything until you get to like ghouls, I guess. So if you want to make a zombie scary, let's say different than an orc, you need to or play up the idea that it's a zombie. You know that you know it stinks, and that the way that they try to grab at you, and when you chop at it, like rough flesh kind of falls off and rotten, and you know maggots are coming out of it, and that changes it a lot. You know, it changes the story, which I think can get people involved more, and that I think is what makes Undead fun. Is this
Absolutely
like,
that, and the idea that maybe if I've never really played this with skeletons, definitely with zombies, at least when you're playing with the more modern versions, that you know they convert you to zombies if they kill you, right? So you really can't go down, even if you're in a system where you might be able to get back up, or someone throws you a healing potion. If you go down and they get converted to a zombie, you're done. So it adds that kind of danger, that sort of danger to it. Let's see. David Sims in the chat says he thinks the infection angle is more terrifying, i.e. the ghoul bite or the gassed stench. Yep, being paralyzed, incapacitated, and devoured alive is horrible. Yeah, so that's the other thing. Once you get at the ghouls and those things, the incapacitation, if they manage to paralyze you, I mean, if you're a lower level character, you're pretty much toast. I mean, if you get, you know, I mean, but it does make for those kind of heroic moments if the fighter's paralyzed and you know they only have a round or so before they're going to get down. What do you do if you're the rest of the party, especially if you don't have other fighters? You know, if they were your frontline guy and they get stuck, like that puts a really interesting moment for, say, the thief and the magic user, whoever else is back there, who now has to try to step up, drag the fighter off, not get bitten themselves. You know, really makes for interesting ideas. But that's definitely the kind of thing where you get people thinking outside the box, right? Is when those kind of undead abilities come in because the stakes are so high.
Yeah, and I think that's where all the people that never take floating disc spell, that all of a sudden that becomes important, right?
Oh, that's a good idea.
The fighter on that thing, get him out of there.
That's a really good idea. I had a guy that was trying to figure out everything he could do with floating disc, but that is one you don't even have to push the rules. Like that's the perfect. And being undead, unlike other things, you can't bargain with them. So you can't, hey, the fighter goes down, we're going to surrender or try to sue for terms or give treasure. Like they don't. They're the one thing that does not care. So yeah, you got to figure out, well, what tools we have at our disposal. Can we lasso the fighter and drag him out? Can we put him on a floating disc? Do we have some, flasks of oil we can do? Like what can we do? And then you get that cool moment in the mix if you have a cleric who can then brandish their holy symbol and push them back with the holy fire. It really makes for a dramatic moment. Fluffy the Griffin in the chat says, undead are terrifying because they don't care about anything. They have no morale and zero desire to preserve their strength. That's right. And they have no goals until you get to the intelligent ones anyway. They have no particular goals. They do not care. They just want to, essentially eliminate life.
Yeah, and you kind of bring up a good point with the clerics, because I feel like that this gets lost, at least in my experience when I was playing later editions. I mean, I went right from first edition to fifth, so I missed all the in between. But I played a cleric in Curse of Strahd, and I could turn undead like twice a day or something. But like in a game like BX, where you can, or OD&D, where you can turn undead constantly, clerics become very powerful in certain kinds of campaigns. It's just like your idea that you can, every time you encounter undead, you have some chance of blowing some of them out of the way. It's really a powerful skill for a cleric.
I mean, not only can you do it many times, I think you can do it as many rounds as you want. I mean, you can sit there and presumably, other than taking up your action in a combat sense, you can keep trying to push them back, right? It is a limitless ability, which, like you said, makes it really powerful, and it makes you unafraid to try and fail. You don't have to try to do that math up. I only have 3 a day, and if I do this and it doesn't work, it doesn't turn them, then I'm kind of screwed. Should I wait for something? Whatever. You can say no, just do it. The only price you're doing is giving up your chance to attack or do something else in that particular round.
Yeah, and it makes your cleric much more than a healer. Because I think a lot of times people, when they look at, because I played the Excellent, they'll, clerics don't get spells at first level. What do you do about healing? I don't think of clerics as healers. I think of them as undead destroyers. That's what I think of clerics as. Maybe because that's the mindset I have coming into, the game at that point. And I think that changes what clerics are, right? They're not these like priests. They're like warriors against the undead, wearing heavy armor and maces and smashing skeletons and turning ghouls and that kind of thing.
Yeah,
It makes your cleric
absolutely.
more badass.
Yeah,
You know?
definitely. And healing is the kind of that secondary thing that's really great when you have it. But yeah, you have to go through that level when you don't have it. I think even second level, you only have maybe one heal a day, I think. It's
Yeah,
something really small.
exactly.
Frederick Ork points out that the Lamentations of the Flame Princess is terrifying, as Turn Undead is now a spell and not an ability. Yeah, I mean, definitely putting any kind of, if you're going to have a lot of undead and you're going to have a real hard limits on what you can turn, then yeah, that definitely makes them more terrifying. And I think that's ultimately what I really like to try to keep. And I know things like Curse of Strahd have done a great job of making it, at least giving you the framework to make undead more sort of terrifying, because I feel like they're not so much in the other contexts. I really feel like oftentimes you get the clerics and the zombies are kind of fodder, and then maybe when you get up to like liches and things, then you get a little bit more of that fear. But I feel like undead is something that should be really respected as an enemy. I don't really get that vibe too much from them in a lot of cases. And I think that's part of what kind of moved me to try to look at them and say, well, how can I bring them back this vibe of being really kind of nasty and not just like an alternative to giant rats for low level parties to kill.
Right. No, that's a great point. And I think the secret there is for low level ones is to really make them overpowered. Because honestly, if you face something, you can do your like adventuring day if you play position and you've got like so many CRs and whatever. Like I almost always go like if I'm making an undead encounter, it's always deadly. Like if I'm whatever many skeletons it takes, deadly. That's where I'm going to go because anything less just becomes not interesting. It's the same thing as fighting anything else until you get up to like you say some of the other high end ones that have spells or the ones that can you know. Knock you out right away. I don't think a banshee's actually undead right, in 5e, but it's like stuff like that. They can drop you to
Is
zero
a
hit
banshee
points.
undead in BX or expert? I don't know.
It's
It
not
ought
in
to
it.
be. I feel like it ought to be. Is no
There's no
banshee
there's
in?
no banshee.
Oh, I'll have to look that up. I thought I
You
just
gotta
saw
gotta
one the
make
other
your
day, but
own.
I might have been looking at the 1E monster
It might be
manual.
Beckme or the Rule Cyclopedia or
Oh
something.
yeah, I always
Yeah,
get them all confused. I kind of just
yeah,
meld them all in my brain. I think the other thing that's what you
yeah.
could do is to offset the danger level, since the are dangerous, is at least with skeleton zombies, they're not particularly smart.
Mm-hmm.
So the players can find all kinds of fun ways to. I think I had one party that they managed to funnel them all through a doorway. So they would sit in the doorway and hack and hack and hack, and the
Right.
skeletons, they would just keep kind of coming at the doorway. I think no, these might have been zombies. But either way, they're just kind of coming in the doorway. And in fact, since they were all just trying to kind of squeeze through the doorway, they were able to make some attacks. I said the three of them could kind of press in for attacks, but they basically all had disadvantage because they're just kind of madly just kind of scratching
Right.
away. So even though the party was overmatched in terms of numbers, there were something like 12 zombies and only three of them. By able to find that choke point, they could really utilize it. So it is a place for an area that the player characters can have, even do some kind of like tactics testing, and because here you have sort of simple, very dangerous but very simple things that you can have fun with. Okay, how can we funnel them in the environment? How can we just trap them? Because you could do something like just close the door and they
Right.
oftentimes won't get through. Or you close the door, and use your hammer and one of your iron spikes to jam it shut. They're probably not getting out, and then eventually they just give up. I don't really, one thing I haven't really thought through is at what point do the undead sense you're there and come alive? It seems like usually they're in a room and you kind of come in the room and they all kind of come awake, which would seem to indicate that if
Yeah.
you left the room, they would tend to just go back to their state, that there's some radius around which they just at some point they just go, okay, they're gone, so we'll go back to just standing
Yeah.
perfectly
Right.
still until the next victims come alive. So you
Well,
gotta
like
use that
it's that out of sight, out of sight, out of mind, right? But
for
I was
sure.
thinking when you said that about I was combining your two thoughts there because I was like, oh, yeah. Also, what's great for using tactics is like, let's say you encountered a pit trap earlier, right? Now you know it's there. The undead are not smart, right? Their zombies are just following you, and this is where I think it's good because again, if you just have your four skeletons in front of the party, they're just going to smash them. But if you make it overwhelming, they're going to have to think. And like you said, because the undead aren't smart, you can let them fall into the clever traps the PCs do. It'll allow them to do something creative with it. Insofar as like when they notice you, I mean, I think again going back to BX, that's always where I fall back. Where my rules said there, I think if in the chase rules or the following rules, they say basically once you're out of sight of a creature, most will stop following you. So that would line up directly with what you're saying. You close the door, they can't see you. You know, yeah,
Oh yeah, that
I'd
definitely. I
go
mean,
for
that
that. Yeah,
definitely works for me. Absolutely. Let's
yeah,
see. Going back to the chat, we have Crystal says, "When I make a cleric, I tend to take spells like light over cure light wounds, especially in games like BX, where you can blind a creature with light. It's super helpful. It is super helpful, and having something with light on it obviously means that someone doesn't have to spend one of their torches, which could be a very precious resource. And Frederick Ork chimes in: Paladin, Palladium, Fantasy, and Rifts has the truly terrifying undead armies. And then let's see, we got one more in there. Oh, he just adds: running a Mortals game in World of Darkness is always entertaining. I've never run any World of Darkness games. I always kind of like the looks of them, but I just never got into them. And as much as I used to buy and read a lot of Rift stuff, I was always in the sci-fi, looking at the sci-fi stuff of Rift, so I didn't really pay attention to undead armies. But I'm always down for them. I mean, did you see the that recent Army of the Dead? I think whichever that Zack Snyder Netflix, the one just came out fairly recently. I actually don't think it's a very good movie, but it does have some good. If you're looking for inspiration for kind of undead, because they kind of set up these sort of a hierarchy of undead where they have some of the slow moving ones that are just there. Then they have some kind of ones that are smart. So you have kind of dumb ones that are kind of your classic slow moving ones. Then you have these sort of smart ones. It's a little bit confusing as to how each kind of cast was made, but there's this clear hierarchy where the smart ones kind of control the other ones. And they have some interesting moments where they're trying to squeeze through a room where all the kind of the lower caste sort of zombies are all just sitting in sort of hibernation, but they can't make any noise. So it's this idea of how they can crawl through without sort of touching them or making sounds, because that will bring them awake. And of course, at some point, somebody makes a sound, which changes the whole thing. But it had some neat stuff in there, including even them trying to using the zombies in sort of a comedy sequence to get past some traps so that they could get to a vault. They're like taking meat, or they took like something and they put it in a microwave to kind of warm it up, and they kind of tossed it, and the zombie would go after it down the hallway, and they'd get chewed up by whatever the trap was in front of the vault. So it had some kind of fun stuff in there, even though, like I said, the movie's not that great. Dues says, Hex Press times Bandit keeps the best crossover since bread and peanut butter. Oh, well, thank you. Appreciate that. Bread and peanut butter is a pretty good crossover. So I guess, how do you feel about going back to what I think it was Frederick that mentioned negative levels? Did you, because you were talking about how you like to put in the powerful undead, do you use negative levels? Do you make an alternative? You do? How do your players feel about that?
I mean, after they are done crying. No, I'm just kidding. No, I think they're fine. And that is something that probably should be discussed, obviously, before you start a campaign. I mean, it's just something you need to bring up. If I'm playing like I'm running right now, Astonishing Swordsman and Sorcerer's Hyboria, they give you a saving throw, which I think is a good way to do it. Because one thing that does suck about level drain is that there's no save, right? They just have to hit you. So yeah, I would probably maybe implement that even in other games in the future, because I like that. At least there's some chance. It sucks, but at the same time, it makes undead very deadly. And if you're using gold for experience points or in the older games and stuff, it's not as bad as all that, because since every level takes double the amount of experience points, even if you lose a level, you'll catch back up pretty quickly. It's not the end of the world. It sucks.
Yeah, I think people in general forget that when they're looking at experience points in kind of old school games, is that the people who end up getting lower levels, or if they have to start over, they tend to catch up pretty darn fast. And then, of course, as soon as somebody else dies, and there's kind of a rotational effect. And that's not even if you're playing in those groups where you have like 4 PCs and you just put the PCs of kind of a certain level and they'll go out, in which case you're not really feeling it much at all. And plus, if that encounter is at the middle or sort of end of an adventure and you get XP and loot from all that stuff that at the end of it all, then you might almost kind of do a good job bouncing back just within a couple of sessions of when it happened. And it's not like you only have 20 levels and now you've lost one, so now your max is like, now you can no longer attain level 20. You might have to work a little bit harder, but you can get back what you lost. It isn't like it's gone and now it's like, well, I now only have 19 levels I can get to, and I've lost, I can't get to my capstone or anything now. It's not, slowly roll. It's not that bad. But I do agree on the save, especially in a combat situation. It's not like they're going to hit you, have one chance to hit you, and that happens, and that's it. It's like it can happen multiple times. So give somebody a break. But at the same time, it's like you are fighting a super powerful creature, and some things can just kill you outright. Here's just the a beholder or whatever can just kind of zap you dead, or a high level wizard can just cast power word kill. These guys can drain levels. So, take care when you go in there and be prepared.
Yeah, I think like as far as alternatives are concerned, one thing that you could do is a saving throw, like I said. The other thing I almost always do, because it's weird how they're written in different games. I think in BX they do damage and they drain a level. I don't usually do both. I just have them drain the level, and then of course you lose a hit die, so you take damage that way. Because I think both can be kind of punishing. The other thing that I've messed around with the idea of trying, but I haven't actually done, is you lose the level's worth of experience, but you don't actually lose the level. I mean, if you reach 0, you still die, but that way you don't have to recalculate on the fly, because that does kind of suck. Like, you're like, oh, hold on, I lost a spell, my attacks are different.
Oh yeah, that is a pain.
Yeah, so you could just say, okay, well, mark down that you lost a level worth of experience points. When we finish this combat, we'll calculate where you're at, and that way you don't actually lose the abilities either. Because I think the people that don't like level drain, that's one of their problems. Is like, why do you suddenly lose a spell? Well, I don't know, because a white just drained your life.
Yeah, you happen to forget it, but that's actually a pretty cool way to do it. I actually wouldn't mind doing that at all. That maybe you lose the only thing that you might recalculate is maybe your hit dice, just because I would want to reflect if it's because usually I would assume, at least the way I usually play them, is it would be a mixed encounter, right? You'd have major undead and then perhaps minor undead or acolytes or something else. So I would want that idea that you are now weaker in hit points to be reflected, but that's fairly easy to do. You can even just say what's your regular hit die is 6. Okay, so you lose 4 hit points, which is essentially the average of rolling a 6-sided die, right? So that kind of leaves. And then I would even be fine with saying, yeah, you are now, instead of saying you drop down to level 5, it would be, okay, you're level 6, but it's going to take you that much extra to hit level 7. It's like, it's just, you have to make up that thing, but we don't have to go through it and redo your whole character sheet. I mean, obviously some classes, it's not a lot of pain in the butt. I mean, if you're a fighter, it's just like, all you're doing is basically, okay, hit my hit points, gone down. And maybe depending on what kind of game you're playing, maybe you lose an attack, or if you have multi-attack, something like that. But yeah, if you're a cleric or a magic user, it can be a little bit annoying. But that's I like that as a way of sort of keeping it deadly, keeping it meaningful, but removing some of that friction. And I think that's probably where some of the ill feeling comes back. Like, you might have just gotten that level, you might have just gotten this cool spell before you even cast it or got to do it, you've lost it.
Right. And it creates what people sometimes refer to as a death spiral, right? It's like, now I've lost my fireball that I was going to use, and because I lost that level. So, yeah, I think I might try that next time I run something in the case of like a BX game.
That's good. Let's see. Frederick Gort said the old Rifts vampire book had the tables and suggested for running haunted carnivals and demonic sideshows. I've seen the demonic sideshow come up a few times, but maybe they grabbed it from Rifts. I want to say one of the D&D, was it one of the ones that they were doing with Penny Arcade? They had some kind of demonic circus or something, but all that stuff is great. Do you have particular settings like to throw into? Do you like to throw like having, I don't even know if it's against type, but having instead of having the sort of Dracula's castle kind of encounter area or domain, do you like to do something different, like having a vampire who's running an inn where the people stay happen to get sicker because, like you said, they're sort of siphoning the energy off of all their guests, or maybe something like a circus, or where they're at work, or even like a hospital, right? If you can imagine, like there was some kind of place where the sick and wounded from a war are being treated, but the head doctor, head nurse is a vampire that's just letting enough of them die so that they can be fed without being obvious to those around them, because it is, say, a plague or a war or something like that. And these things happen. In fact, maybe the person is actually spraying the plague as well as claiming to heal the plague in order to set up their own little vicious cycle of gaining health.
That sounds awesome, actually.
That's it's like a pyramid scheme for vampires. Yeah. So where do you like to put them?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the game, obviously. Like, if I'm running something very specifically like Gothakar, I could do something like of Dracula, but since I mostly run what I would consider sword and sorcery, I tend to go with the creepy, unholy undead thing. So if it is a vampire, it's usually not like up there socializing and like dancing the night away. It's more like out, ripping people's throats out at night, kind of thing. Like, don't use the bonnet. Hopefully you don't have to use the restroom at night, You go out to that outhouse, you might not come back.
So are they more kind of Nosferatu style, like outwardly just more, I don't know, just demonic kind of looking, as opposed to the very put together sort of Vlad blood type. That's cool.
That's how I would tend to use them in most of the games I run, because I feel like that's more kind of demonic. Yeah, like it's a good way to say it. They're more demons than they. I mean, technically they're undead, obviously, but just speaking for the idea of the look of them and stuff, a vampire would be more kind of demonic, kind of evil, whereas like a zombie would just be something that's ripped up out of the ground, and that kind of. But I would probably just run that in a different system, like Ghastly Affairs.
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, I think they're both kind of cool archetypes, right? They kind of fulfill different purposes. And I think, narratively, when we see them in fiction, there are kind of different reasons why the authors might choose one or choose the other. I totally agree that for a swords and sorcery type game, that the Nosferatu one fits really well. I could probably see I imagine there's got to be some stories, if not straight out of like a Conan story, where it could fit, where, I can just picture in my mind the story, starting out with Conan, whose army was on the worst side of a battle. So he's running away from captors and finds kind of the castle sort of on a hill that seems forlorn. And somebody greets him who seems to be just kind of too nice and too charming by half, but a little bit weird. And then them kind of playing with that, or maybe he has some other wounded comrades. And then once they get inside, the comrades are dying. And then finally Conan figures out what's going on and somehow muddles through, dealing with the vampire. And then the last thing is they're back running out in the night again, and then still running away, right? Because I mean, that just, to me just has like that kind of, I feel like there are a lot of stories like that where Conan's running from somebody, finds a place that seems like it's going to be a good place, turns out to be a worse place. He's running, so what is he doing at the end? He's back to running again,
running away again.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's funny. I was having that conversation the other day with somebody. I was like, Conan runs away all the time. I don't know where people get this idea that he's just like, I mean, he is badass. He does slaughter a lot of people, but he's always running.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, look, half the stories, he gets captured, or he's about, he's running away. He's a slave on a ship, like all kinds of, he's shipwrecked. I mean, I think it's funny because I want to say in the original deities and demigods where they had, or I think in one of them they had a listing for Conan. And of course, in that, and this is like the one, like the Little Brown Book version, like deities and demigods, which I'll have to dig up at some point. I don't have it with me. I mean, he had kind of crazy stats. Like he was like 19th level thief, 20th level fighter, like whatever level this. So, they're clearly looking at sort of the max potential of Conan. But yeah, I mean, I think it's, not to go too far away from undead, but I think the power of undead, especially in kind of the swords and sorcery genre, is these things that should be feared, these things that you should be looking to run away from. You should not be looking to just stand toe to toe and just hack and hack and hack. Like, no, like these things are overwhelming. They're unfeeling. They don't care about anything. They don't get hurt from your slices, even though you might wound them, and they have no pity for you. So, your goal is to try to get through, or if you need to get to the other side, then get to the other side. It's not to kind of hack away at them with wild abandon. And Conan and other, heroes in those types of stories, they treat them with the respect they have, which is usually it scares the crap out of them and they run away. I always still remember those, like, those like the little, in the comic book versions where they would put like the screams that would come out.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because speaking of that, it kind of all ties together. You started to say that your players didn't figure it out, but something about a jewel or something at the beginning about that was part of the undead. And the first thing I was thinking of was, wow, that's very kind of like sword and sorcery. Like that's the thing you need to smash, and then all the undead goes away. I don't know if that was actually what you had intended, but I like that kind of thing too. Like they're overwhelming until you figure out the way to beat them. So you never have to fight 100 zombies. You got to get past 100 zombies or run from them. And then if you kill that necromancer, they all go away. I like that kind of undead. That tends to be how I would use them versus they're just kind of wandering around.
Yeah, for sure. It's getting back to them as an environmental hazard. You need to figure out how to fix the hazard as opposed to just trying to hack and slash the hazard away. And once you allow the undead to keep coming back, it even makes it less worthwhile to try hacking and slashing them because you're not even really putting a dent into them that way. Getting into the more powerful undead, what other ones do you like? I always kind of like the concept of mummy lords and mummy rot, though I have to say I can't remember actually using them too much. I just kind of love the sound of them. And then I was reading that, I don't know if you were in the chat or you watched it. I did that video on that Clark Ashton Smith story, The Abominations of Yondo, that had, I don't know if it was the first version of a lich. but
Yeah.
it was a weird. I had never seen this type of lich before, where it was basically a mummy lord with like a slime with a face that was commanding it,
Right.
like Gudetama. If you've seen Gudetama, the like this like scrambled egg with a face on it, is like on top of the
Man.
thing, commandeering it, which I thought was a really interesting way to even take kind of mummy lords sort of up a notch, which is
Yeah.
really fascinating. And I had not remembered seeing that before. But what other ones do you like to use besides ye old vampires?
Yeah, I love mummies, and I tend to take my mummies more like desiccated corpses versus wrapped up. So
Mm.
I don't usually do the this guy, like I usually do them more in the idea of like they look just like all dried out, and typically I even run them occasionally with intelligence. Kind of like the original Mummy movie, right? In the Mummy, he's basically like a sorcerer, right? I mean, if it's been a long time since I watched it, but
Are you
he's
talking like
not.
the
So,
old
yeah,
school mummy, or
yeah.
Brendan Fraser era mummy? Because actually I
Oh no,
like
no,
the
I'm
old one,
talking
but I
about.
also like the Brendan Fraser one. We'll shout out for Brendan Fraser's mummies from the what
Right,
1990s,
because he's
whatever.
also like that's the where Scorpion King comes from.
Yeah, that was, yeah. Scorpion King was like the third. I mean, they went kind
Yeah,
of downhill after the first one, but the first one I thought was really good. Had the sort of
yeah,
mummy as a sorcerer who had been entombed with a curse that they accidentally woke up the curse. One of my favorite sort of
right,
bad guy minions, that guy Benny, who there's a great moment of the film when they first accidentally awoken the mummy, and the mummy's stalking through the necropolis, and they were all kind of separated. They're all scattering around, and Benny gets stuck in this dead end, and the mummy's kind of slowly coming up on him, and he's got this necklace with every holy symbol in the world on it, and he's just going through like a keychain, just trying to bring one up, say something, bring one up, say something. He's just going through it all, and he finally gets to like the Star of David, and he says something,
right,
and that's what kind of triggers the mummy realize, like, oh, like you're like a Hebrew, like
right.
I know you, and so then he kind of convinces, or he basically shows Benny, like, look, I've got a lot of gold, so you're going to work for me now. But it was just great because it showed this moment that is very much kind of in keeping with like an old school gaming thing. Is you have this intelligent undead coming to you, and he figured out a way to kind of get through to the mummy, and so then he decides to be, I think he says in the movie, I'd rather be at the right hand of the devil than in its path. So he that's what he made his choice. David
Yeah,
Sims
oh, I
says
like
the
that.
first edition Skeleton Warrior is an old favorite. Yeah, I like all those. I like all those variations on Skeletal Warriors and Death Knights, and I think they're all very kind of cool creatures with a lot of different flavor. I don't know, liches somehow became the ones that everyone has kind of gravitated as sort of the undead thing. But I think there's a lot of cool ones. And I think mummy lords, and I think those are totally cool too.
Yeah, I think that's because witches have magic, right? And people like to use magic, so it helps justify a lot, maybe. But I don't feel like you need to justify things with monsters. So I think that's why people like witches. It's like, well, he was a wizard. That's why all this stuff is this and this. But you know what? The Mummy Lord could have been a wizard too. He
Oh,
just
absolutely.
got wrapped up as opposed to becoming a lich through evil means or whatever.
Yeah, and I definitely
This
like
is
the
got.
idea. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, it's before it goes away. They said that Frederick lets his players play as zombies, vampires, and ghoul characters. We gotta discuss that. But go
Oh
ahead. So I
yeah.
didn't want to. I just didn't
No,
want
no,
that to
no.
roll
That's
off
cool.
the
I was
screen
just gonna
before I
say, one
saw
of the
that.
things that just occurred to me from thinking about the mummy movie, it would be very cool to have. I mean, that would be a great kind of campaign, is having a mummy sorcerer who's
Yeah.
trying to regain all their powers, because that's what the mummy is kind of trying to do in the first part of the movie, and in the second part, he's trying to raise up his dead lover, using using whatever the girl, the living girl, as a proxy to get the spirit. Like, that's kind of a cool just campaign there. If you realize this is happening,
Yeah.
how do you stop it? Um, Getting back to what Frederick Work said about letting their players play as zombies, vampires, or ghouls. I want to say it was one of the guys who might have been one of who played at Gygax's table, talking about having a similar thing with playing undead, and not only that, but using the turn undead table essentially as your as your ascension. So you would start off as like a skeleton, or you start off with whatever's the lowest one, zombie. Then you would become a skeleton. Then you would become a ghoul. Then you would become a ghast. Like, you would go up, because they all are essentially, they all go up HD each time. So like
Right.
a zombie, and then a skeleton, whatever. So like there is this kind of sort of almost like a level scale for sort of undead. But it's kind of a really interesting way if you wanted to play with having sort of these ascending undead, because they do kind of set this little scale up. When you put them all together, you have basically 1 through, whatever levels essentially of an undead creature.
That's interesting. See, I always think of undead as well, most of them, not vampires in that list, obviously, but I think of them as like mindless in the case of a zombie, and in the case of his ghoul, like more like an animal, like animalistic. And vampires, I always think of as being evil, but I suppose you could play them up like it was a curse and they don't want to be a vampire, or maybe you just like to play evil characters. Like, I'm curious. I think I might be odd in this case that I don't like to have evil PCs and stuff in my games. I just don't. I don't feel like it's the way I like to go.
I'm kind of with you. I like to play the good guys. I've always liked to play the good guys. I like to play that. I think that's the more interesting side of it. To me, in these games, you can be evil, which just means you can do whatever you want. To me, there's just less interesting choices. You don't have to, that you're not worried about kind of any kind of judgment or your own or anybody else's. To me, it just I like it where you have some limitations, right? You have to think about, I don't want to be this way. I don't want to be this kind of person. An interesting thing I've been just listening to, there's a really great podcast series that goes through all the Lord of the Rings books. And when he was going over the part when they were in the Barrow Downs with the White, there was this definite thing where the White both kind of hated the light and wanted it at the same time. There was this kind of element of it felt like a curse, like they were in constant pain and torment. But it was just it was evil. But there was this whole concept of like it hates it, and so but also yearns for it, but can't have it, so just wants to destroy it. So you can kind of build in some complexity. I'm sort of with you, as I don't really think of zombies as being smart, though. I think that there have been now, I'm sure, and I think in movies and other things where they've developed kind of the idea of sort of zombies that seem at least somewhat smart. So you could probably, in the setting, if that's something your players are going to play and you want them to be able to make decisions and not just be like an animal or not even, to go with that. But I'm kind of with you as far as the evil in general. We got some comments from David Sems in the chat. Let's see. They say they'd allow it if the player was willing to play out undeath as a curse of some sort, but that takes a very special kind of player. And then Frederick says, I have a background in playing undead killing machine paladins if you want to play evil characters. Well, I mean, there's nothing wrong with undead killing machine paladins. You got to be good for something. But yes, I would agree that it probably does take a special kind of player to play undeath. In fact, I had a player in a game, not the game I'm running now, but another one, whose character had basically had died. So he had found this book, a magic book, and the book had a spirit inside, and the spirit had at some point of weakness, the spirit had entered his body, and so it was kind of in his brain with him, and it would kind of talk to him. Was a little bit mad. It had been trapped in that book for like 1,000 years, kind of locked somewhere, so it was a little bit kooky and off-putting. But it never took control of the PC or really did anything, but it would just sort of be there in the background, just kind of whispering and chittering and doing things. At one point, the player dropped to 0 hit points, and that's when the thing made a deal, saying like, I can bring you back. Like I can make this not kill you outright. And so the guy took the deal, but part of the deal was he was now of a type undead, and as part of that, he couldn't eat things. In fact, it would like make him like vomit up bile if he tried to eat stuff. So it was interesting because we had these social encounters where he had to like try to pretend to eat, but then try to like not to gag on the stuff and figure out how to do that. The same thing like they mentioned in the chat about healing not working. Like he couldn't be healed. In fact, it would hurt him. Like, oh, I'm trying to figure it out because he didn't want to tell anybody else because they would probably shun him and kill him in the party if they realized he was undead. And it was something that, since we were playing through Discord, I could send him in private messages, so we could have these kind of private message combo things of playing, so the rest of the party, they knew something had happened and that he kind of got back up when he should have been killed, but not the kind of exchange that had happened. So that, unfortunately, then the game kind of ended not too long afterwards. But it was definitely going to be an interesting. I wasn't, to me, it wasn't something that was necessarily going to be like the whole campaign he was going to play undead, but it was definitely a way for him to keep playing. And then maybe if he could figure out a way to make being undead work for him, then fine. But he knew that it was kind of a high stakes game of, if you were found out, you were probably going to be shunned and not outright killed if you walked in anywhere. So you got to do the best job as you can of keeping it to yourself.
Yeah, that can be really cool. First thing I was thinking of when you were talking about the book was like when you have like a sword, like a sentient sword or whatever, right? That's gonna like control you. In one of my campaigns, I had a the sword that was kind of evil. It needed to drink souls, so which is and the player character that had it had to kind of hide the fact that he was like murdering people sometimes because he had to. He had no choice, but because if he didn't do it, then he had to make certain saving throws. If he failed, then he would just wake up in the morning like covered in blood. So it's like he had to figure out a way to like get into fights with things, and it wasn't really like they were high enough level too that it wasn't there wasn't a lot of in that campaign there was a lot of like social stuff and things going on, so it wasn't like they were constantly in fights. So he'd be like, oh no, the sword's getting hungry, like I got to figure out how to do it. So I like that. I mean, I think those things can be cool. I'd never thought about doing it with undead. That's really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, before I get too far, Jack Hole said in the chat, I always thought of zombies and skeletons as vessels without a soul, whereas ghosts and whatnot are souls without a vessel, which I think is really kind of cool.
Yeah, I like that a lot.
Yeah, that's a really great way of looking at some of the kind of different ways we could. Because I think we probably get into a whole thing of just different ways to define undead and kind of make gruesome. Because we really just have this sort of blanket undead, right? Which works on a certain level for certain abilities, but kind of like we've been talking about, it gets a little bit finicky when you're talking about, well, like vampires are distinctly different than, say, a ghast or even a mummy lord, right? So, we could think of these different ways to do it. Like, yeah, maybe the reason why zombies and skeletons aren't really smart is because it's just like pure negative energy that animates them without really any intelligence, or they only have the intelligence of a thing that can give them orders. Some outside intelligence can command them, but they only have very limited capabilities. Whereas you pass certain barriers, or because it's of the way that these particular undead are formed, then you get into maybe either there is part of the soul of the original individual who is trapped here in it, or some other, you could talk about, is it an infernal intelligence that has come in and inhabited it, which I think is what the white in Lord of the Rings, I believe that was the whites are. They talk about how Sauron or the Witch King had kind of sent these vile spirits from the east, and the spirits had come into the tombs and sort of animated them. So they were these sort of spirits, but it wasn't the spirits of the original people who had been buried in the tombs. There were these basically interloper spirits that had come in and then taken over, right? So it really gets into kind of some interesting ideas of how you want to categorize kind of these different types of undead, where they come from, how they're made, and then potentially differentiate how they're unmade, if they can be unmade, unmade at all.
I like that a lot, actually. That's a really good. Yeah, I like that. One thing we didn't mention, which I think is really interesting here, that was worth talking about, I think, is ghosts. I think ghosts are really interesting because if you think about like how ghosts are used, like the Monster Man, James from the Monster Man podcast talks about this every time ghosts come up, is the idea that like in ghost stories, like ghosts have a very particular reason, right? They're there to like lead people or to right a wrong or whatever. But in D&D, a lot of times ghosts are just monsters to fight. So it's an interesting
the Patrick Swayze type ghost trying to make pottery with his his living wife versus just screaming spirits.
Yeah, exactly. Or that are they there because there was a wrong that needs to be righted, and that's in a sense they become like quest givers, right? Or are they just like not even intelligent, but just some incorporeal, but some evil just kind of grouped together, creating some kind of energy that just destroys things that goes near it. Like what are ghosts and how can they be used that are different than just another thing that you fight?
Yeah, totally. And they can be complex, right? A ghost can be sort of evil or destructive or violent, and yet have that kind of, like I was saying with the whites, they have this thing that they can't control, having become a ghost, and they can't possibly solve the thing they need to solve. So, but they're going to be this kind of harmful force until the party, somebody can right this wrong or put this thing where it needs to be, or give them the closure. I mean, isn't that kind of the plot of all the different ghost hunting shows and things, where they're going in trying to figure out why this ghost is terrorizing the family? Oh, it's because, this matchbook that's been buried in the yard. Oh, we found the matchbook and the ghost was never seen again, right? That kind of thing. Right. Or, whatever.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting, right? Because if you look at them as just things to fight, they're much less interesting. So I feel like a ghost should be a story, not necessarily a monster. I think that's a good way to approach it.
Let's see. So here we had Frederick talked about they had a player who stole Strahd's blood, and take his place as a leader. The rest of the party went back and raised a new army to invade and eradicate. Well, that's definitely an interesting way to finish off Curse of Strahd. That's kind of, I feel like
wow.
that's, I don't know why I keep getting Lord of the Rings vibes from stuff, but that definitely feels like if somebody else took possession of the One Ring, right? So they take over from Sauron, and then you have to go fight them. Raid LC mentioned Cold Hands from Game of Thrones comes to mind. I don't remember Cold Hands. Now someone might have to fill me in on that one. And then No Fun Allowed mentions all about that level drain. People would rather die than lose levels. Yes, but people would rather die than do a lot of things that they probably should just. I'm always, when I play my characters, I play my characters as they want to survive. I'm the guy that's like looking for what's the exit to this room? Where can I back up? How far can I go? I will take the level drain if it means I can live to fight another day. But there are definitely some folks that don't like that kind of losing, who would prefer to just send their guys out and about in a blaze of glory than take the level loss. But not me.
No, I find people make statements like that a lot, and I'm not sure that's true. It hasn't been in my case. I very rarely do I find a player that like will sacrifice their character because they're like, oh, forget it, I lost this magic sword that I had, or I got level drained. I mean, most people want their characters to survive. They're not going to be happy that they got a level drain, but they're not going to just like stand there and be like, fine, kill me. And if they are, I guess maybe I just wouldn't really want them in my game. Maybe that's what I would say.
Yeah, I think there's certainly, I don't know if it's, I don't want to say it's like a new versus old style of gamer, right? But I think there's, if you're getting that kind of mindset of your character who's on this sort of, ever increasing arc, right? And it's kind of getting back to what we talked about with Conan, right? People may have the idea of Conan maybe from the movies, if they've only seen the movies, maybe, I don't know if other, I know there's been so many comics and so much material written about Conan, not just the original stories. The idea of Conan as a force who never loses, who just kind of keeps fighting their way to bigger and badder things, or you think of superheroes, whatever. But I mean, even superheroes have lots of setbacks. But, I think there's that type of gamer who is willing to take the setback as part of the larger journey of their character. And there are those who don't want those setbacks. Now, I don't see that too much in the OSR space. I think it's more just because of the nature of the game. But I think certainly in the context of 5th edition, I think it does come up where people feel like you have to talk about, and to me, it almost seems weird to have to talk about in session 0 the fact that your character might lose something, or they might suffer in some way. But it seems to be something that at least some players really need, or they don't want it. They want the game to be a space where their characters may have momentary setbacks, but the idea that they could permanently lose a level or permanently lose an item is really is not something that they want to experience. But that's not my kind of gaming. I just want my guy to live, so I'll take whatever if he can live. Let's see. Frederick Rourke says Cold Hands was more from the books than the movies. Okay, that makes sense. I haven't read the books. Couldn't get into it. I don't know. I started the first one forever ago, way before the TV show, and I just didn't get into it. And David Sims says there's a lot more character development opportunities in dealing with level drain than just boring death. Yeah, absolutely. And you can have fun as a player kind of playing these things up. And I think you could, if you wanted to, do something like create a table. Like, the modern OSR scene loves interesting tables. So you can really think about what does level drain look like from your, a mental physiological state. Do you pick up some kind of tick? Do you have scarring? Is one of your arms now a little bit weaker than the other arm? Is one of your legs a little bit limp? Do you have like a hunchback now? Do you have a crick in your walk? Is there some disfigurement on your face? As far as how to kind of make it something more than just numbers on a paper being erased with a pencil, you could really play up those different aspects. The Fledgling Gamer says hello, Fledgling Gamer, and then Diego Martinez talking to you, not to me. He says hi, Daniel. Excellent topic to talk about. Well, I picked the topic, Diego. My choice.
Yes, you did. So, what's interesting is so in my Astonishing Swordsman and Sorcerers game, if you're watching the live plays and you're not caught up, I'm going to skip spoiler. One of the characters dies. Well, actually, this is not the first character that's died. It's probably about the 12th. But they happen to have found this artifact that allowed for a resurrection, which is incredibly rare. It might be the first time somebody's ever been resurrected in a game of mine. But the player was like, well, this is special. Like, this is not, I'm just up in a bear. So they've actually done exactly what you're saying. They've got this whole thing where the person that administered the magic item that resurrected them, they're now connected. and they basically have a whole thing where they're like sharing memories, and there's all this weird stuff. And he's been playing the character out, like why was I chosen to come back? Like, and they really like, and I think you can really get into it and build your character. Based on the fact that you got level trained, like what happened? Why now you're fearful of undead, or maybe now you're out to slay all undead because it happened.
Maybe you have a little bit of a sense, like those folks who, they hurt themselves and then they get that kind of weather sense in their gammy leg. Maybe you get a little bit of like a tingle in your bones when undead are near. Fledgling Glamour has a character idea that seems like way out of my league. I guess I'll read it to see. Chester Flanagan, the half-elf Fathomless Warlock. I don't even understand what Fathomless means. Is that some kind of subclass of Warlock from 5th edition I'm not aware of? He treats his patron like a sugar daddy, has an entertainer background as an exotic dancer, summons tentacles, says a bunch of innuendos as he attacks with Eldritch Blast or his tentacle. He also has a very flamboyant voice and is by. I want his arcane focus to be a speedo, and he will pelvic thrust Eldritch Blast. But that's just flavor. Wow. That's quite... That's quite the character, Fledgling Gamer.
Wow, save versus death there, Fledgling. That's what if you had that in character introduction at one of my games. My first thing to you would be like, make a save versus death.
Oh, it's a subclass in Tasha's Cauldron. I actually have Tasha's Cauldron.
Nice.
I haven't really read through that. I'll have to read up the Fathom. I mean, that just gives me what's the name of that movie? Bruce Willis. Hudson Hawk vibes. There was that. Do you remember Hudson Hawk with the late great Danny Aiello? But there was also I forget his name. Who was playing the villain who would just start pelvic thrusting whenever he was about to do something. He had these great moments. I think he was about to turn on some kind of Da Vinci machine, and he just starts making pelvic thrusts in the air. Always a great moment. Hey, Hudson Hawk is a terrible movie, but I love it. I love it. I will unabashedly always love that kind of awful movie. Do you have any good? You feel like there's some good movie treatments of undead? That's a wonderful segue, by the way. That
is a
that inspire you for undead in your game. Do you ever go back and say, I'll watch, like The Mummy, or I'll watch one of the Night of the Living Dead movies and kind of get stuff from or it could be books or other media as well?
Yeah, I mean, I've been watching. This is probably why I mentioned the Mummy. I've been watching all these like 1960s, 1970s horror movies, and they're great. I mean, they really address things in a much different way, and I just think it's good to see like how different eras of creators create things. Because there's reasons why. Obviously, people play a certain way. You might like. I think like Castlevania, right, is just came out or whatever on Netflix, and like that's really one way to have like a vampire. And then you watch like some old vampire movie, and it's a completely different kind of vampire. And I think that's in fact, what's funny, it came up earlier. I couldn't think of the name of the thing, but I think it might have been called Vampire Carnival. But I just watched one where it was like a carnival and they were vampires. So it's like, but like that stuff is great because it's so cheesy, but it's like so ripe for like ideas. The movie themselves aren't great, but it's like, oh, that's cool to have this, mirror that you look at it. The next thing you're teleported into a room where the vampires can get you, and like you can use these items from it. But yeah, undead are not a huge focus for me, but they're super interesting though, and I feel like I need to be using them more after this conversation too. How about you?
Why? I mean, that's always my hope from these videos, that inspires somebody to kind of dig in a little bit more if they were something they had overlooked for whatever reason, whether it's undead or mega dungeons or anything that inspires folk to look at. I'm trying to think of the last really cool. There was, what was it called? Until Dawn, which they were vampires and they traveled around in like a van with tinted windows, and they were just sort of kind of poor white trash vampires.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah, it might have been, I don't know if it was her first film, but it was directed by the lady who directed The Hurt Locker. It was like one of her earlier films. The great Lance Henriksen was kind of the leader of the vampires. It was really a lot of fun, and kind of just kind of the vibe was just different because they were definitely not the kind of, I think at the time, I don't remember exactly when the movie came out, but you were getting into sort of the Anne Rice style, very gothic, vampires, and these were kind of anything but. They were just kind of down and dirty, traveling around. Let's see, we got some more questions in the chat or statements on anyway. Let's see. Diego Martinez says, "What do you think about wandering undead monsters? Would you present them in groups? What would they be looking for?" I think it's a good question. So yeah, I definitely use undead on my wandering monster table, and I think in terms of if they were say in the wilderness, there are a couple ways to do it. Right, this is where I think, and if you've watched any of my videos on how to handle random encounters, right, is I don't treat them like they're random, like they just fall out of the sky. I try to figure out in that moment when I've rolled up the result before I put it at the table. I try to think about what's the context. So if I rolled up undead, I might think about if and I roll distance, how far away the party is, and if it's something that's sort of they haven't gotten to quite yet, I could talk about, well, maybe there's a little family gravestone, grave area that was desecrated or damaged in one way. Maybe there was an old site, kill site, a little battle took place here a while ago. Whatever, where undead could just be there in a permanent state, or there could just be wandering. Might be some undead that aren't. We usually think of undead as being attached to specific places, but they don't have to be. There's no reason why an undead couldn't be just listless. It's stuck in the world and it doesn't have a place it's attached to. Or maybe in actually the game that I'm running right now, there was an undead creature who was like a ghast, was attached to the place where he killed, but the party burned that place down. So now that guy is running around free, and I'm looking forward to when and if they run into it again. Doesn't really know anything about them, but they might put two and two together about kind of so there was an inn, and it was in the inn, but they only kind of saw the shadow of it in there, and they rightfully decided not to go in. And at that point, they're like, okay, we're staying out of there. And they just decided to light the thing on fire. But again, because of the nature of Undead here, the burning the place down didn't destroy it. So it just, but it kind of untethered it from this place. So it wasn't there, and it would have stayed there, which wouldn't necessarily have been good. But they couldn't kill it, or they chose not to. But by doing that, they have now let it, and now it's just kind of wandering around. So it's out there in the area. So it could certainly be something like that. But I think you have a lot of options. But Daniel, what do you think about wandering undead?
No, I think what you're saying is absolutely how I would do it. Typically, if you're right again, if you're talking about wandering in the wilderness, what I try to do is roll my wandering stuff like the decent amount ahead, so I would see it coming, and I would basically have them encounter a graveyard or a burial mound. It doesn't have to be obvious either, right? It could be some tribe of orcs buried just under the mound, right? Or it could be some stones that have fallen over. Or I mean, you could even do just the maybe they're being drawn to something if you want to tie it into a bigger story. I think if they're basic undead, like skeletons, zombies, they're not going to talk to the party anyway. So you don't. I mean, it's nice for you to have an idea, but it doesn't actually. You don't need to have something super strong. But if they're anything that's even partially intelligent, then you want to kind of know where they're coming from, where they're going.
Yeah, you just want to make enough sense in the moment, right? So that it's plausible that they're there. You want to keep that idea of, could there be undead here, and then have enough to be able to part of the party to say yes, right? I like your Fluffy. Sorry, go ahead, finish.
I was just thinking because in my Stars and Swordman campaign, I think it was the very first session. So I was like, over a year ago, I put an undead that could only be hit by silver, I think it was, but he had a magic sword on his side, and it was like a way for them to get a magic item really quick in the campaign. But they decided to run from it. So every once in a while, when they're in the desert, they hear rumors of this like a zombie that's walking around with a beautiful sword strapped to its side. So I used that as like a rumor thing because they left the sword there.
Oh, that's awesome. Fluffy the Griffin says they're over here contemplating undead plants and other unusual things. Undead oozes are fun too. Rotten ichor that seeks to decay everything it touches. Yeah, I love that stuff.
Oh.
And I think when you're if you want to add flavor to different parts of your dungeon or wilderness, whatever, give them kind of an undead. I think of them on mechanically as like a tag. Like you think of what makes this area of woods or what makes this particular cave different than some other caves. Is it has some kind of connection to undeath or negative energy, whatever you want to use. And so in that place, there could be undead oozes, or perhaps in a tomb, a normal ooze came into contact with the undead, and over however many years they were touching, they kind of merged influences. Maybe that's where that Abominations of Yondo slime with a face came from, was some kind of weird merging of the undead and a slime. But those are great ideas. Let's see. No Fun Allowed says they're running a OSE barrel maze game, and undead are without a doubt way scarier than anything else. Yeah, I mean, I think that's the kind of, and it's one of those things that people oftentimes, if they're coming from outside the OSR, they don't realize how powerful reaction rolls can be and how powerful morale can be, and being able to essentially short circuit fights either by talking or by being able to cause things to run away from you. And so, yeah, in those kind of situations, when you get these things that absolutely will not run away and can't be bargained with, it can definitely be scary, especially if they surprise you or somehow catch you in a spot where you're not prepared to run from them or deal with them in other ways.
Yeah, I think in a game an OSR style game where morale checks and people running and things like that are common, when you encounter undead, that is one of the strongest things. Is they are not going to run away. There's no negotiating. You are fighting them or you're running if you can get away, and that's much different than a game where you expect to fight everything.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. Just trying to scroll down here through the event. Jackal said Blood Creek had a zombie horse that was really frightening. Is that a Blood Creek? Is that a movie? Is that a I'm not familiar with it, so let me know, Jackal,
cool.
what that is. But yeah, zombie horse is great. Army of the Dead had some kind of zombie or skeletal. Yeah, I think it was a zombie horse and also a zombie. I think it was a tiger. You know, they were doing this whole vibe with Las Vegas, so it was like as if like one of the tigers from a show got loose. It was definitely crazy. And then yeah, Raid LC mentions classic Nosferatu is great. Classic Nosferatu is great. I got to go back and read the original Dracula, by the way. I haven't read it in forever, and I feel like there's going to be good stuff hidden away in there that hasn't really gotten adapted out too much, or has been sort of forgotten about as the kind of, because I feel like the versions of kind of vampires, the Strahds, from like you mentioned Castlevania, right? They come almost from, obviously definitely not the Nosferatu version of Dracula, right? But there's all the accretion of media into that kind of very suave vampire. But so I want to go back and take a look again into the Bram Stoker version, see how much is the suave, Dracula is there, and what kind of quirks have just sort of faded away because they weren't cinematic enough, or they were hard to bring to the screen, or they were too kind of literary, that sort of just kind of dropped off the radar. And I bet you there's a lot of that, like going back to that lich, even though it has a lot of the hallmarks what we might consider a lich in today's game, it's also vast. We don't get the backstory about how it got created, but it's also vastly different. And I'd be curious to go back to some of these other undead creatures and see, if we go back to some of the roots, what might be there to be some interesting things that we can pull out that just kind of got lost as things just got smoothed over with time. Jackal says that Blood Creek is a movie based on Norse myth. Oh, that's really cool. I'll have to check that out. And then Diego Martinez says, sometimes I like to present the dead characters into undeads and face the new party. It is great fun. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. So I do like to roll if characters or NPCs kind of fall and they're not tended to in some way. I do roll to see if they become revenants or something like that. I do put some stock as like you should try to do your best to give them a burial and give them kind of a proper send off. Otherwise, they might be unsettled, and those are definitely ones that would be kind of wandering the landscape if they don't feel a great attachment to wherever they were dropped or felled. They might wander, and they might feel ill will against the party, particularly if they feel like it was the party that led to them dying. So I think it's definitely cool to do if you have an NPC or something that maybe the PCs killed them, maybe the PCs double crossed them or just left them like they are wont to do with such characters. Yeah, have them come back as revenants, death knights, other types of undead, seeking vengeance.
Oh, I like that. I like the idea that there's a chance that anybody who dies, like an NPC or whatever, might come back if they aren't taken care of. I don't know why, but I feel like the group I normally play with, they're always very much on top of that. Like very rarely do they leave somebody unless they have to. Like they're always burning the bodies, and maybe they think I might do that, but now I will do that. I wasn't planning on it, but
yeah, no, I think it's one of the. I mean, my party, I think they've so far. It'll be interesting because they had one NPC died to this poisonous mist, and so far they haven't been treating the corpse. They just kind of cover them with twigs and sticks at the moment. Oh no, they did end up digging a grave. My last session, they did end up digging a grave. They didn't really eulogize him, but at least they planted him in a grave, so that might be enough. But yeah, they've tended to kind of take care and do that stuff. But they also understand that there are practical concerns too. Is if you're going around with a corpse, you might going to attract the attention of all kinds of scavengers and creatures and other things. So you want to bury the corpse for that reason. And yeah, burying it also is a preventative measure towards them potentially coming back to get you. I'm trying to think if there's anything, folks in the chat, is there anything that you feel like we've we have not discussed about Undead. We did go over level drain, so you missed that. You can go back in the replay, and we talked about that a bit. We did talk about a bit, it just in passing, but how powerful effects or powers like the paralyzation in ghouls. I always like ghouls. I just think they're kind of great creatures, and I like that they have a little bit more intelligence. They're a little bit scarier. That paralyzation can be kind of really freaky. The first time one of them hits somebody, and you have to say, roll that save. Like the player's eyes go wide. What?
Yeah.
I think that's great.
It makes that one player happy they played an elf.
Yes. Yes, because that is a very situational thing until you run into a bunch of ghouls, and then you're like, oh, thank goodness I had that. Fluffy the Griffin asked,
the elf is. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead. No, finish your thought.
I was gonna say then the elf is upset later when it's on level 5. It gets level drained and has to get a lot of experience points to go back up.
Oh yeah, that's a lot of experience. Fluffy the Griffin says, "Did we discuss interesting undead locations that aren't cliche?" I think we did discuss some. I mean, it wasn't a particular question, but I know that we talked about some kind of more some different locations. I think somebody brought up the possibility of sort of circuses and that thing. I mentioned the possibility of an inn being run by vampires where they could subtly drain people, or I think I mentioned like a field hospital in which the vampire might be the head doctor or nurse that's slowly siphoning off things. I think for things like vampires, I think you can play them in the kind of Nosferatu type, which definitely has to kind of sneak around because they are obviously going to be outed as soon as they're seen as a vampire. But if you're playing the other kind of vampire, you could think about all the places they could try to put themselves in around a lot of people, and then you could think about the other part of it is, okay, first be around a lot of people that you have access to. That's great. Now, if you're the vampire, you want to think about how can I just subtly do things in a subtle way where I can get away with draining a lot from them without being noticed. So places like hospitals would be one. Battlefields, would be another one. There's probably other locations that you could try to do, or something like the orphanage, right? Maybe what if they were hiding in plain sight by a church, right? They're not in the church, but they're kind of in the orphanage near the church, but they're there just, a lot of babies and things come in. They're not have a lot of health and maybe sickly anyway, and they're in there kind of subtly doing that, right? In sort of in the shadow of their great enemy. And you can really put them anywhere that particularly if you want to get into sort of what I always think of when I think of World of Darkness. I think of kind of Vampire the Masquerade and sort of all these, how they've kind of infiltrated society. If you're going that route, then they could really be anywhere. David Sims adds swamps, ancient battlefields, maybe. Yeah, anywhere that kind of death is ever present. And maybe the vampire can help quicken it along, or if it is something like a swamp that maybe has something, you could see how they could find a swamp, maybe even seed it with rumors of gold or treasure or something to lure individuals out there. And then because it's a dangerous swamp, if those folks don't come back, it's just going to be put down to the swamp, and they're going to miss the fact that there might be a vampire in the midst. Let's see.
Yeah, and what's cool about that is since vampires have that ability to charm and control people, right? You can have them sending people out into the villages and stuff, talking about the treasure, putting rumors out there that there's treasure there, even acting as guides to bring people, to bring the PCs into the swamp, for the vampire to then, make their move.
Absolutely.
I think the hardest part with vampires is if you're using them, at least in most RPGs, they can't be out in the daytime. So you've got to really kind of play that part up, right?
It's true, but they can be inside.
Right, they could be like underworld bosses, right? The head of the Thieves Guild, that kind of stuff could be really interesting.
Yep. As long as they can kind of work in buildings, and it's even a way you can kind of set that context up, right? If you go to the field hospital and it's got heavy drapes that keep out most of the light, even though it's high noon, there are kind of candles in there providing light. Then you can kind of set this tone of like, well, why are heavy drapes down? And of course, then the vampire doctor says some excuse about keeping out the cold, or something else. You can kind of play up with these weird, well, how are they operating like this, and what are they doing in the environment? How are they making sure that the populace doesn't find it funny? Or are they the kind of vampires that are sort of having what do they call the human, not spawn, but they're sort of when they kind of mesmerize humans, or they sort of bring thralls, kind of human thralls.
Right. Thralls,
maybe that's something where they've got kind of thralls in certain areas or in certain places of power to sort of keep them protected. You can have a lot of fun with that. David Sims says that's why I think curses work well. Cursed undead could be almost anywhere. Yep, absolutely. Definitely if they are either spawned or animated or sent on some mission by some other power, then yeah, you could totally find them anywhere that power has sent them to be.
And I mean, that being said, as much as it's nice to be creative and stuff, I think too, as a GM, you've got to. Sometimes you need to make things a little more obvious because what you want is for the players to be able to make informed decisions. So they should understand that if they hang out around a lot of graveyards, they could be undead. If you're constantly putting undead in the middle of a strawberry patch, then they're not going to understand that, right? Well, I guess
They're not going to go to strawberry patches. Is what they're going
right,
to do.
exactly. But you know what I'm saying? Like, so I feel like even though it might seem like it's on the nose and we always want to be creative, we have to also consider that if you're constantly putting your undead in weird places, then the players won't be able to make informed decisions unless you really telegraph it out, with rumors or whatever else.
And that's why setting up context can help, right? So if you're going to put, this is where you can use items and things. So you can have a curse or some kind of animating spell. But what you can do, you can do that, but you can do in addition is, let's say they do find a wandering band of zombies on the road or, whatever one, the fact there's a wandering band of them, which should probably kind of trigger some kind of, this is not normal kind of thing. And then what if they all have amulets around their necks, or they all have these weird iron rings on their fingers, or they all have sort of collars, kind of heavy, steel collars around their necks, maybe with some kind of insignia or something, so that even though as a GM you may not really know what it means, the players are gonna immediately understand that it's not just that zombies are here by chance. It was something sent them, right? Which they might not get because if you say that they're cursed, how does your party know that they're cursed, right? They don't know. You can consider these things as almost props. Yes, they're cursed. These props kind of show the curse, which then shows the party that something's going on. And of course, just be ready for the fact that they might start wanting to research that insignia and go do that and drop whatever they were doing before to try to figure out why whoever is the bearer of that symbol is sending out bands of zombies. So, you want to use it with care. But yes, you always want to try to build up as much context as possible, which, is why if you want to set up connections by things, they're going to take them from where they're constantly showing up. And if they're showing up all over the world all the time, they're going to think that they're playing in the land of undead. Let's see. We got another. I missed that one. So Fluff of the Griffin had said that they run a town where the entire populace was undead they were being puppeteered by an ancient eldritch being, which is kind of a really cool adventure idea. They're coming into town and the whole town is some kind of undead parody of a real town. David Sims says that they've been GMing for guys who are all about the same age as us or a bit older. Oh, well, thanks. I'm not the oldest one. That's nice. So I've got to mix things up to keep them on their toes, but classic throwbacks are always appreciated. Yeah, you can always throw twists into things. And one of the things I like to do is I like to not call things out by their monster manual names. So, so my players, they probably would not have known the significance of it anyway, but when they encountered some ghasts in that kind of undead dominated castle, I didn't call them ghasts. I just called out the fact that they were fast moving, the sort of feral, and had kind of the smells and kind of the skin and kind of look associated with undead. But I didn't say, oh, these are ghouls. So they'd have to kind of figure that out. And if they figured it out that they were ghouls, then I'm fine with that. But they have to put that mental work in because their characters don't know the name ghoul. And I'm not even certain that in this world that they'd be called ghouls, even though statistically they essentially match up.
Yeah, it's funny you said because that's something I was about to say is that sometimes too, if they're getting rumors and stuff, they might hear that there's a vampire, right? But the vampire might be a white, or it could be a zombie. Like it's just what the local populace calls it. So that's a good way to mix it up without making it, but still telegraphing that it's undead. Because the populace might call it something different.
Absolutely. All right.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. No, so sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off. Yeah.
Yeah, but whether you're doing undead or whatever, whatever monster that it is, they're only going to call it whatever they're going to call it.
Absolutely. Let's see. Okay, so two things. I do have a hard stop in about 12 minutes. So be mindful, chat. So get your comments in sooner rather than later. Raid LC says we had a mechanic where zombies had 1 hit point, but had a chance to get up or attract other zombies. And if you died after being bitten without getting a cure, you became a zombie in D6 hours. I like that a lot. Kind of matches in that kind of, I don't know if you ever played 4th edition, but they had this kind of minion idea concept, which I always liked a lot. And I don't know why 5th edition didn't take it, but essentially there were creatures that had 1 hit point, but you had to hit them directly. So if you, in 4th edition, had a lot of spells and abilities that if you let's say there were two enemies and you hit enemy A, you might do some lesser damage, kind of splash damage to enemy B. It might be like, as the fighter, you do 1d6 to your main opponent and you do 2 points of damage to the opponent next to them, right? For the minions case, they had to be the direct recipient. If you just did like, and you do a point of damage to the other enemy, that wouldn't kill a minion. But if you did directly any more than a hit point or more damage, they would die. And they even scaled up. So you could have like a level 20 minion. So it had all the stats and everything of a level 20 creature, or, you know, hit die, whatever, hit 20 hit die creature, but it still only had one, you know, hit point. So it was really great. So I like that bringing that for zombies makes sense. I do like that you might roll a die or something to see whether you permanently killed them or whether they just start to immediately get back up. And I like the idea that they might somehow attract other zombies. And of course, the getting bitten and waking, becoming a zombie is a great mechanic. Let's see. Fluffy the Griffin says, mixing things up a bit is fun. Always being unpredictable is also like having too much gonzo. Yep, I agree. You got to balance it all out. Oh, here's some more about this. Let's see. Raid LC adds, our overconfident fighter got bitten and unexpectedly killed. So they tied up the body and sunk it in the mother of toads bog to preserve her in hopes to resurrect sometime in the future. Okay, so they're going to make like one of those preserved bog people. I guess if they're undead, I guess you just sit down there. That would be fun if it got loose, because, you know, ropes and stuff will not stay that strong. I think, you know, it's one thing if you're a dead body and you put some ropes through the bog. It's another thing if you're constantly struggling and you have just basically, you know, you don't run out of energy. That's the thing, is they might keep just trying to move, and so maybe one of their hands will come off, or just because they'll just rub through. Like, you could play with all kinds of funky stuff if they then eventually break through the bond after so much time and just start wandering around, or come to find the PCs for some reason. We got some more here. Let's see. Saw him in one of our hex is a witch with a powerful zombie chained underneath the water of her swamp. That's another good one. And that's another fun thing to play with, kind of zombies in water or other substances in which living folk can't really exist for long periods of time, but you could have undead down there that you could have at the bottom of a lake or a pond. Maybe they can't get out for some reason. Maybe they're enchanted to stay down there, but anybody that or swims in the lake suddenly has skeletal or spiritual or zombie arms reaching out to try to grab them down. What was that? The dead marshes again from Lord of the Rings? Everything's Lord of the Rings today, apparently.
That's like the end of every single Friday the 13th movie, right? Where they're in a boat and the hand comes up.
Right. Somehow he's on the bottom of this deep lake, but he's able to like leap up and grab somebody. Yeah. He's got a long arm. The long arm of Jason's like the long arm of the law. Okay, we got Crystal here. Says they took on 5 zombies in an arena with no, and oops, I'm not sure. Maybe that got munged up a little bit. Was doing really well until they bit me, causing strength drain. Whoa, so that's an interesting way of doing zombies. Biting, causing strength drain. That makes them super nasty. I mean, if you get a couple of zombies, they all bite in doing, I don't know how much strength drain the GM was rolling, but you're rolling like a D4 or D6 strength drain. I mean, you're gonna even a big buffed out fighter is gonna go down pretty quick from that. Then Jonathan Rhodes says, that's a great thing with mostly making one's own monsters. Players will not necessarily know the abilities outside of what you're telegraphing what their character has learned. Oh, and Crystal said no armor. Well, yeah, 5 zombies, no armor. That's tough for anybody, especially in an OSR game. But even if you're playing something like 5th edition, that's a tough read.
Indeed.
Daniel, anything else? Did you have any notes? You always got the notes.
I usually have notes. I have no notes. I was going into this completely with no notes. I was like, we're going for it. It's Undead.
We still made it about an hour and a half.
Yeah, that's pretty
talking
good.
I'm afraid I hope we didn't skip anything super meaningful. But I think we covered a lot of bases.
Yeah, I think so too. That was Undead is super interesting, and I think my big takeaway from this has been thinking about it a lot is that the flavor is really important with your undead. If you just treat them like they're any other monster, then they're going to be any other monster to the players. But if you really play up the fact that they're rotten and they're unthinking, in the case of the ones that are, they're not going to stop. That can really add a lot of tension and make it more of an exciting battle, let's say, against the lower level or the lower powered undead anyways.
Absolutely. So David Sims says, do we have any favorite undead? Daniel, what's your favorite?
I like mummies. Yeah, I'm a big mummy person. And the thing is, because somebody else mentioned about making your own monsters, I usually, if I'm making some kind of an undead that's not just like some random roll or something, I a lot of times will flavor them how I want. So I'll make mummies that are sorcerers, mummies that have certain magical abilities with them. I like that kind of stuff. So, because I kind of think of mummies as like preserved, but not so preserved, as intelligent on some level. So I like them as my powerful undead for sure. How about
Yeah,
you?
totally. Yeah, I like them all. I mean, I have to say, I have a soft spot for Death Knights and Mummy Lords. I don't know. This just I just love the lore kind of about them. I just kind of like that. But vampires. They're all good. I love ghouls. I love sending ghouls racing at people. I love having the skeletons. Something about Death Knights and Mummy Lords kind of just do it for me. And then Fluffy the Griffin says that we're two of their favorite OSR YouTubers, so they're glad that we do these
Hey,
things. Well, thanks. We couldn't
all
do it
right.
without you
Well,
guys. So glad that
that's right.
everyone could join us. I think I'm all, I mean, not to say that I couldn't talk more, but
Always.
I think for now, I think we're all, I think I'm at the end of my undeadness for the day. Any
That's right.
final thoughts, Dan, you want to share on undead before we wrap things up?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we can, everybody has their own kind of thoughts about this, how these things would be. So comment below. So you got to
Yes.
comment. Let's see. Yeah, no, it'd be interesting because I'm curious. We could build an undead army because I'd be interested in making zombies more interesting because I feel like they've fallen into this like fast moving or slow moving, and that's like your options. So I'm curious what people will do with zombies. I don't know. That's it. I'm not giving anything out. I'm asking now.
Yeah,
So,
totally. Let
you
us
know,
let us
but
know. We'll
yeah,
wrap this up in a second, but definitely
yeah,
comment on the video after it's up. I will have a podcast version, so you can comment there as well. Wherever you are, comment. Let us know, and maybe we could do something with creating sort of an undead army, and in particular, yeah, what can we do to zombies besides just the now the stereotypical are they fast, are they slow kind of thing to sort of give them a different vibe. Well, thanks for joining me as always, Daniel, coming in on a Friday. I
thank
really
you.
appreciate it. We'll take a break from these, and maybe in a couple weeks we'll do another set of two. Everybody have a great, if you're in here live, great rest of your weekend or your night, day, evening, morning, whenever you're watching or listening to this. Daniel, you want to say bye? You want to plug any links before we get out?
Goodbye. Yes, plug the link. You can follow me if you don't already. Plug
The
the link.
link to the YouTube is in the show
Yeah.
description, which will be everywhere. Do you have any? Is
Yep.
there anything else? Do you want to plug your podcast? Do you want to put your podcast link in the chat or send it to me and
If
I'll
you
add it
want
to
to,
the
yeah,
short?
I have a podcast as well. If you're interested in that, it's mostly about using chainmail and OD&D, so it's a little different than what I do on YouTube. So you can check that out if you're interested. Thanks.
Absolutely. Oh yeah, send me the link and I'll throw it in the show description. Guys, talk to you later. Game on.